ask anybody's question but yours. You're an idiot. And really a disloyal person.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Whose Portal Is It Anyway? On the Disloyal Idiots channel here on the Fans First Sports Network. I'm your host, Christian Guzman, and welcome to Whose Portal Is It Anyway, the show where the NIL rules are made up and the conferences don't matter. I'm joined by our contestants, Steve Heller and Kevin Wall. How are you gentlemen doing today?
Oh, God, that was perfect. That was absolutely perfect.
I have watched that show way too much.
Yeah. So if anyone didn't catch the reference, Christian is noting that there is way too much transfer portal action going on right now since last we talked. So, yeah, fun.
Well, welcome to kind of, again, the new age and era of what college sports is nowadays, where, you know, I mean, I personally like it because that's just kind of what sports is in general. One step closer to, getting all the athletes to also kind of sign contracts, which is what we're kind of expecting the end road of this is all going to be. But for now, we got the portal, and for now, we've got not just portal, but recruits also still coming in to Syracuse football, which at this day and age, we didn't expect in the past to have 18 recruits already in the class of 2025, and for multiple people to commit to Syracuse from the transfer portal after the spring game. This is the new world we're living in.
Yes, and we're not done portaling.
No,
Somehow, we are not done portaling.
Yep.
Kevin, do you know off the top of your head what the date is for the last activity this window?
I believe you have to be in by May 1st. So I believe Wednesday is the day for entry.
Okay. So, and I say window because we're literally in a situation like European soccer where we now have transfer windows.
Yeah, we are.
Yes.
Sports, which, I mean, to be fair, from roster moves and how things are working out, it's not a bad way to do it if we're going to have to do this. Like,
we're in our January transfer window and we're looking for our Virgil van Dijk.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm looking forward to Wednesday having an interview with Fran Brown sitting at Manly with his arm out the window. Deadline day, just waiting to see what happens. Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting what the wild and woolly world of transfers does. Since we last spoke, I believe we have at least 5 entrances to the transfer portal from the SU roster.
Yeah, and there were some big names, but not too many that would be what you would expect to have an immediate effect on the program. I should say this upcoming fall. I think the biggest one in terms of names going into the portal was backup offensive lineman Joe Moore, who was rumored to, and I think confirmed at points, to be the starting right guard last year before he got injured a week or so before the opening day of the season. That obviously, since he did get injured, got kind of transitioned into a backup role as the roles kind of settled as he came back into the team. And then eventually that's kind of where things have settled. And as we know, Fran is still bringing in more offensive line talent, especially since there are a couple offensive line players who are, still waiting to come in just based on, graduation dates and like not getting onto campus and time for spring practice and things like that.
Yeah, and then Jaden Bass is also in. So I was looking, Mike's got a piece that we've got scheduled for the morning. Jaden Bass and Jaleel Smith, defensive linemen, have entered the portal.
He's playing musical portals.
Yeah.
He entered the last window, pulled his name out, and then re-entered his name yesterday.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the other 2 that are in the portal are from Syracuse, Bryce Cahoon, backup wide receiver, more so like on the third team, on the third string of wide receiver lines. And Ty Gordon, who looked like at least in the spring game, made his way up to take and earn some second team reps on the defensive line, but he has decided to enter his name into the portal. So not too many like big names that are leaving the Syracuse Orange.
Yeah, and that's, it's it's interesting to see when you start looking at who left at this point. I thought Bass might have had some promise. I thought Cahoon might have had some promise. Like it may just be that they know they got recruited over, and that people coming in, or we're told that there's a good chance they're going to get recruited over. And it seems like, from what I can gather, everything I'm hearing about this staff is that they're not going to BS these guys. Like,
Right.
if they can find an opportunity somewhere else where they're going to get what they want, like if they want to fight for a spot, stay. If not, hey, like, get your name in and get moving, because you have an opportunity now.
And in Bryce Cahoon's case, it looks like one of the wide receivers spots is getting taken up by Colorado State wide receiver transfer Justice Ross Simmons, the Rochester native, coming over to Syracuse via Colorado State, where he had an excellent season with the Rams this past year. And it looks like all of a sudden you could have a four-headed wide receiver trio, or four-headed wide receiver group of Jackson Meeks, Zeed Haynes, Justice Ross Simmons, and Trevor Pena. And oh, by the way, you also have a healthy Oronde Gadsden coming back as well.
And Thunder Day and backing him up.
Right. Yeah, I think this, to me, watching the spring game, obviously Gadsden wasn't out there, and it seemed like Syracuse needed another weapon on the outside. I thought Haynes, has some promise. Pena was working well inside the slot. But now you add Ross Simmons on the outside. If Gadsden's going to be used on the outside, as they said, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see if they actually do that. But I think you've got a lot of flexibility. And if you run Gadsden and Pena on the inside and guys on the outside that can go deep, I mean, you're going to keep teams from double teaming Gadsden. And then, by the way, LaQuint Allen out of the backfield.
And you even still have another downhill threat like we saw in Daryl Gill during the spring game as well, who was shot at the depth chart. And we know that he has speed to burn as well as an outside threat. Yep. So now you're starting to see a offensive passing attack, which, I mean, at the start of last year was looking really, really questionable at times. I mean, a lot of people like Damian Alford, but we saw at times last year that maybe he didn't have exactly what Syracuse needed in a number one X wide receiver.
Right.
And maybe this is also one of the reasons why he was essentially pushed out of the program, as we saw, earlier this year, when the SU announced he was no longer on the team. Offered now with Utah, in whatever the conference they are in now, because God, who knows what? It's still so confusing to try and pick up the remnants of the Pac-12 and find their nesting homes in the other random conferences in the world. But now you all of a sudden go from a wide receiver room that was really not looking promising after the injury to Oronde Gadsden last year, now to a wide receiver room that you're actually comfortable with the depth that you have now in that wide receiver room, especially with the addition of Justice Ross Simmons. And now you've got a lot of options for Kyle McCord to get the ball to in the field.
And you mentioned LaQuint Allen out of the backfield. We saw in the spring game his new backup, everybody's favorite freshman, caught a wheel route and caught a belly on the other side. That, do you want him running downhill at any cornerbacks? Because I would be frightened as a cornerback myself.
And we got to remember these exactly, but you got to remember also. You talk about Yassine Willis being a freshman. You got to remember that these are only the freshmen that enrolled early. You still have Jamie Tremble coming to campus. You still have Emmanuel Ross coming to campus. Two of the highest ever offensive rated recruits and highest ever rated recruits in the past decade or two that Syracuse has ever gotten to come onto campus, and those guys just aren't here yet. Just mainly because they didn't graduate high school early like some of the other players did. Steve is getting ready to pull up the sheet, I can tell, as well.
Yet, but for the record, they are currently moving down the list, which is weird to see. And we'll talk more about that later. But they were, I believe, number 3-ish, 3 and 4. They are now officially moving down the list of Syracuse commits all time.
because now, again, I talked about this with Steve and Mike in a couple podcasts ago, but Kevin, again, Steve also put out this article as well, where earlier this week, talking about how Syracuse football just feels different.
Yeah.
And now you're also seeing that in the recruiting, where teams are believing into that Dino philosophy of belief without elephant, a belief without evidence, because Fran has now kind of put his words into action, with his leadership, with his practice etiquette, with his team etiquette, with his community etiquette. And that's now attracting not just future recruits to commit to Syracuse very early for the immediate incoming class, but now you've got Syracuse already with 3 or 4 recruits in the 26 class,
Right.
which is 2 years out. And the only recruit that I can remember in recent memory committed to Syracuse 2 years or more out was Tommy DeVito, and that is basically it.
Yeah, I think that just shows you that you've got a coaching staff who's adapted to the new landscape of college football. And I think, nothing against Dino, but this notion of, well, we're going to wait and see and kind of play the field of who we're going to get isn't the philosophy that Fran Brown has. What I think is interesting is, there's back and forth on the site in the comments about the 25 class, which is top 10 on a couple sites. And we had someone bring up the quantity versus quality and say that Rivals is the only one they look at because Rivals doesn't inflate stars. But and so I took a look at Rivals, and where that class is like a 2.75 average ranking, because there's a lot of unranked players at this point, but there's a lot of local players that have signed. And so I think what you've got is Fran Brown, who understands, like, if he has a connection to a player, he's not concerned with where they're rated and whether or not they're perceived to be out of Syracuse's league. He's going to make the offer and try and get them on campus. And then the other part is, he's not afraid of no stars. On the flip side, if he sees a player, especially it seems like players that are in the Northeast that he feels can make a difference in the program and fit a need for what he projects, he's not afraid to grab them, as we've seen with the trio of CBA commits. And I think only one is rated right now, and one from CNS, an offensive lineman. And so, yeah, it's an interesting philosophy. I think that the 26th, though, he's not afraid to swing big and get these folks to campus and sell his vision of the program and his staff. I think that's something to definitely keep an eye on as we move forward through the summer. And they actually get more of these recruits on campus for camps.
If you're watching the live stream right now, I've got the 24/7 25 recruits for Syracuse pulled up on the live stream, Sundays at 8 p.m. If you're not watching live, but you can also watch this on the VOD on YouTube as well, in order to take a look at some of the players that Syracuse have already have gotten committed for the class of 2025. You see Darian Williams from CBA Syracuse as the 4th highest rated recruit currently in Syracuse's recruits for 2025. As Kevin mentioned, keeping that really, really strong, guys that Fran identifies in his backyard and says, hey, we're going to get you. And that's essentially what he's preached. And this is something, again, like we said earlier, something that Dino said he wanted to make it a priority. And a lot of coaches prior here have said they wanted to make it a priority to keep players in their backyard home. But only Fran Brown has managed to actually turn those words into action, which is impressive already.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kevin.
Well, I was going to say, I get the sense that he's willing to take their commitments and not saying you have to prove yourself as I don't need to see what you do next fall, or I don't need to see you come to a camp and compete against these other players. And I get the sense that former staffs were doing that sort of thing. Like, hey, you'll come to camp and we'll put you against the players that we're offering from New Jersey and Pennsylvania and so on and so forth. And if you show us that you can outperform them, then maybe we'll give you an offer. We have to see how it goes, or if we don't get this guy, we'll come back to you. And I think Fran Brown's willing to say, like, hey, I want you. If you want to be here, let's commit and let's not play these games. And it'll be interesting to see how it works out in practice, because ultimately he's got to win games, or these local kids that, people are excited about, people are going to say, well, why would you think you could build a team around recruits from the Northeast and win? But it shows you the confidence that he has and his ability to identify talent, and then also the staff that he's put together to develop that talent.
Yeah, and it's funny because the way all these sites end up working now that these players are committing and these players are getting more and more offers, now they're starting to get rated, it's what we kind of talked about to a degree of what Dino was doing and finding these weird diamonds in the rough, but this is to a whole different level.
Yeah.
Of like, he's getting a 26 to commit, and then the next thing you know, they're named a 5-star. Like, that doesn't happen at Syracuse.
No.
That's what we used to complain happens at places like Bama or something like that, where, oh yeah, it was, he was listed as a 3-star, he committed to Bama, he's now a 4-star immediately. Like, it's just strange to see happening. And
Again,
I don't know.
Today is April 28th, 2024. In most eras of Syracuse recruiting, just in general, you would be lucky if Syracuse had one recruit by this time.
Yeah.
Fran has 18 committed in the class of 2025. Let's quickly change the tab to 2026, where, again, the only long-term recruit that I can remember ever having for Syracuse has been Tommy DeVito, and he's got 3 already for the 2026 class. One of them has a composite rating that is already a 98 5-star.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
At a 98-39 composite, that puts Isaiah Williams at the, technically, if you count McCord, the 4th. If you don't count McCord, the 3rd highest recruit of all time at Syracuse, like since recruiting rankings were a thing. So this is a linebacker in 26 that is already breaking ground, like breaking records for Syracuse. And also only the 3rd 5-star that we recruited out of high school ever.
It seems to be pretty good when you've got a guy of this caliber who has already signed paper to Syracuse. Now, of course, we know a lot of things can change. This is the era of NIL. Things will always be subject to change. But at least for now, Syracuse has a guy who in the composite has a 98 grade and is 5 stars and is the number 20 player in the nation, not the state.
And I think that's the big thing. Like you mentioned, a lot can happen, but the fact is that as the coaches are trying to get recruits from the next 2-3 classes to come to campus this summer to be part of their camps, this is something that they can show them. Like when these recruits go online and look at, well, who do you have committed? And they see who's already on board. I think it makes the job easier because now you're not trying to convince someone to take a chance on you and there's no one around them. I mean, look at the sell job for any Division I recruited football player is we're going to get you the NFL. We're going to get you the NFL. And as we saw this over the last few days, Syracuse didn't have anybody picked this year. And in recent times, it's been a harder sell to show these recruits like that's coming to Syracuse is going to get you on a path to the NFL. And if to change that, you're going to have to start landing some of these players and next year have a few that get their name called. But if you can at least show, hey, go on 24/7, go on Rivals, go on 3, and look at who's already verbaled for the next 2 classes, now you're selling what you're selling without having seen the on-field product in a game is something that the recruits can at least see some tangible evidence that, oh, you are getting people buying in.
I mean, we didn't even talk about another, transfer that made his way over to just in this past week. And for Steve, it's obviously very, very nice to find more offensive line reinforcements. Seeing Savion Washington, the offensive tackle from Colorado, transferring over to Syracuse. This is just how crazy that this cycle just has been for Syracuse. We haven't even gotten through the 5 or so players that have committed just this past week, starting on Wednesday, just based on being at the spring game. If you were looking back at the VOD and looking at those 24/7 recruits for 2025, you look and see that all of those players have committed during spring practices, just mainly because by coming to spring practices, by coming to the spring game. These spring practices are now more than just getting the team ready for the upcoming season. There are now recruiting events that our Fran is putting on. And Mike and I saw it with the amount of people that were just flooding the sidelines every single practice on Tuesdays, Thursdays, Mondays, Fridays, to come to Syracuse, to even watch sometimes even in snowstorms, and then eventually committing to Syracuse. This is something that just doesn't happen in Syracuse beforehand, before Fran Brown came onto campus. And to see the amount of people that he just committed, I think we didn't even talk about the 5 or so guys that committed again this past week. It just goes to show you just how crazy this entire new era has been, and how a coach, like Kevin said, who is willing to adapt to this era, how important that has been for Syracuse to identify and get.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned earlier, I wrote that piece earlier this week, Christian. I'm pretty sure Kevin can attest to it as well. Something's different here significantly, and if you look at the historic rankings, like you were talking about a minute ago, there's a lot of Brown right here. Like these are the all-time recruits in Syracuse history. You know, you're looking at probably the top 14 or so here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. At least 10 of them are Fran Brown recruits. There is a wonderful, did not qualify, that was recruited by Greg Robinson. You remember Andre Baskin being a big question mark whether he was going to remotely think of making it to campus, and he definitely didn't. Cecil Howard's a really unfortunate story, but that was something. Morant had a great Syracuse career. I don't think lived up to his 5-star rating, but had a great career in Orange, and I loved watching him. But beyond that, Diamond Ferry is Diamond Ferry.
Yeah.
Shout out Boston College.
But look at this list, and it's all Brown, outside of Braylon Ingram transferring in last year.
Right. And less than 6 months on the job, right? If my math is correct.
Yeah, no, he's not even been. It's not even been. We're just
end of November, right?
Yeah, end of November, start of December. Yeah, but really, it was start of December. Like, remember his introductory press conference, I believe, was December 4th.
Yeah,
and so think about that. We're about to come on to his 6th-month anniversary of being introduced to the Syracuse media and to the Syracuse public. And he's already gotten 18 recruits to commit to 2025. He's gotten 3 recruits to commit to 2026. He's brought in a Brinks truck of transfers to bolster the squad already, including, the starting quarterback for Ohio State, the guy who threw balls to the number 4 pick in the NFL draft this past weekend. And now you've got a feeling in this program that continues to grow and grow in anticipation, just mainly because of one man's actions and one man's relentless pursuit to build this program into what he knows it can be, just based on his previous experiences in programs that have winning mentalities previously.
Right.
So during this, I realized a stupid fact. High school recruits the 3 kids that are committed for 2026 are all within the top 10 all-time recruits in Syracuse history. Now, we talk about Isaiah Williams as the 5-star at like 98.39 composite. The 4th highest rated recruit in history is Demetrius Samuel, who is a safety that's also in that class. And the 10th highest is Deontay Sheffy, who's a running back in that class. So what the hell is happening here?
And remember, for those who don't, again, because all of this has been a blur, Sheffy committed during the spring game.
Right.
Wow.
And I can't, I've got to campus in 90, and obviously there were seasons of, excitement, but in terms of this level of talent, like it's probably the early McNabb years, when it was McNabb, Conrad, Tabucky Jones, Donovan Darius, Marvin Harrison, and / Quentin Spotwood before his injury, and Kevin Johnson, and like that's like the only comparison. And even then you had people that were sort of like, McNabb didn't have the hype coming in, because it was Syracuse was still running sort of that gimmicky offense, like
right.
And so it's crazy. I mean, I think this would have been like, to me, it's like if you would have followed up McNabb with landing Michael Vick, like this is like that's where you would have had Syracuse fans in terms of teetering from the norm, which is gloom and doom. We expect the worst Syracuse, to now we've got people running around printing up college football playoff shirts in April.
Insane. And mind you, those teams running that gimmick offense, their offensive coordinator was none other than the late George DeLeon, who was mentor to Fran Brown, who is now our head coach. And we have a weird Syracuse Ouroboros going on that makes no sense whatsoever, but I will fully accept.
We continue to mention, and Fran continues to mention, that his goal with Syracuse, of course, is not just to build an SEC level program based on his experiences at Georgia, based on even his experiences at Baylor in that program, but also to build up and return Syracuse to the era of Pasqualoni, of DeLeon, to bring Syracuse back to that era in the 90s, which is, what he grew up watching and what he grew up learning about Syracuse. And of course, fans of your ilk, guys, Steve and Kevin. Hi, I'm the young one here. Let's get that out of the way. Again, put that check mark in the podcast 20 minutes in. But like, that's the era that you guys grew up watching Syracuse football, and that's the era you guys grew up loving Syracuse football. And fans of my age have only experienced that joy in 2018.
Right.
And that's it. Like, even when Marone was having his success, there wasn't this much talk and hype around the Syracuse football program.
No.
Not at all. No, there could have been the potential to, if he just stuck around maybe, but there was nothing that was remotely on this level.
The second year was close because they were 5-2, and then Chandler Jones got hurt and they lost the last 5. And so they went from a team that looked like they would have been ranked and, not to the level of competing for BCS, or even New Year's Day bowl games. But I think they would have, had a chance at a strong finish, and then the wheels fell off that one.
Yep.
And then that killed really the momentum for expectations. We were shell-shocked at that point, right? It was a shell-shocked fan base, and everyone still dealing with trauma, post-Robinson trauma. And it's opportunity that I think, and that, Steve touched on his piece and my piece about Syracuse needing to capitalize on this momentum this summer, is I think important too, from you're configuring the dome to individual seats. You're moving all these people around from season ticket holders. You're adding this new 44 club level experience. You've got a guy whose people are excited about, and this is the time to really lock in some of these sellouts. I mean, I think that should be like the big push for the administration is like, if you can get to a point where Fran Brown can tell these recruits like, hey, it's June 15th and we've already sold out our home opener.
Right.
Like, I think I think there's an opportunity now. Like you've got to catch people while they're ready to invest and keep that going and take over for him so that he can focus on the football side. Because I noticed, I saw, a bunch of alums had a meet and greet in New York City with John Wildhack and Fran and the coaching staff, and the alums are bought in. And it's great that he can do this stuff. But when it gets into July, like you can't have him, showing up on sports radio every week and Bridge Street Channel 9 and then sending him to the Syracuse Mets game and like then asking him to go to Albany or Rochester. Like,
Right.
he's got to focus on football and the recruiting. So I think he hit the ground running and he's paved the way. And now someone else has got to, I'll use the track analogy. He's got the lead. Someone's got to take the baton and just hold on and carry it through the finish line now.
Well, and that's going to be, I mean, I don't want to sound dour, but we've all been around the Syracuse athletic program long enough to understand that has never been the strength. The off-field stuff. I mean, when Fran Brown in his introductory press conference or his first post-game presser calls out everybody for the way things were run pre-game.
Yeah.
What I'm hoping is that that's a wake-up call to the administration to say, hey, guys, this can't happen again. Because if it does, then we're kind of like, I don't know, it just seems...
Well, you run the risk of shooting yourself. Yeah.
Right? Isn't that effectively what happened during Marone? Like,
yeah.
He just kept getting more and more frustrated and was like, hey, the NFL's calling, I'm leaving.
So one of the comments they said, I was told, was that whenever there was when they had their 12-game schedule and the other 40 weeks, they wanted to put their opponent as the Syracuse University Athletic Administration. Because that's what they felt they were battling.
Oh,
and it was these things that you're talking about, support. When Marone was hired, people forget, but he spent the summer. They took him to Scranton or Binghamton and Rochester, and he did the minor league ballpark tour. And there were Syracuse athletics nights, and he did all the shaking hands and kissing babies and let me show up at your Chamber of Commerce meeting and talk to the businesses, and that was great. And the first year, when they played that game against Minnesota in the Dome and the Greg Policy kicked off, that place was packed.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next year they looked at them and they're like, okay, so what are we going to do this summer? And it was like, no, like you sell the tickets. And my hope is that, Tory Ball came back to Syracuse from Virginia and so has some outside experience and played here and understands, what needs to happen off the field. They hired the athletic director from Long Island University to come work as sort of the football ops. I forget what his total title is, like a deputy AD or something. But so you have someone who's sat in the AD chair that can hopefully bridge the gap between the administration and football, that was with Brown at other stops and knows what the expectations are. And like him or not, I think Matt Rule comes across as a guy who's pretty detail oriented in terms of a program. So Fran Brown, having worked for Rule and Kirby Smart, and kind of blending the best of both worlds there. And should be exciting. And so hopefully, they keep that going. And some of that's going to be like letting like, don't let football fall off the radar this summer, and that's, making the social media videos, the practice workout stuff, the other things that the program has seemed to have improved, in the last few months, keep that going and really keep it in the forefront of people's minds as we kind of step away from that piece.
Yeah, and if somebody else can pick up even half the slack that Brown is leaving behind, that should be enough to carry the momentum.
Yeah.
And then hypothetically, like you're saying, by next year, maybe some of these other pieces of the puzzle, Tory coming back, like you said, all these other ancillary roles will flesh out what and where they need to do going into the offseason next year, so that we're in a better, in a better baseline. Like we're raising the floor instead of just trying to spike and like pop the ceiling up. Like we need the baseline to improve.
Yeah, and kind of just to put a bow on this, it feels like again Syracuse hasn't had that support before from the athletic department, where Dino didn't have a guy like a GM, not necessarily the recruiting and the video staff that Syracuse now has, not having the LIU AD coming in as a director of football ops. Like it really didn't feel like just in general. I mean, Steve, I remember like in that one podcast a couple years back where we went through Clemson's football staff and just all of the players, all the people that Clemson has on their staff, and it now feels like Fran is slowly building that up so that by the time it gets to July and it gets to August, Fran can actually now focus on being a football coach and being, a guy who has to deliver a product on the field, which is obviously something that I think we're all looking forward to when the summer practice season comes around. And I think Steve is going to try and request some days off so he can attend one of those practices.
Might have to be trying to find a way to take a morning or afternoon here or there somewhere.
Yeah. Well, it is about halftime right now. We'd like to thank, obviously, our halftime sponsor and our sponsor for this broadcast, Home Field Apparel, your one-stop shop for all your throwback apparel needs. Of course, your throwback Syracuse apparel needs. Get a 1990 square Syracuse logo Alvita to go jersey. How about a cool bomber jacket or sweatpants? The comfiest shirts, sweatpants, everything you can ask for. You can use the code NUNES23. That's NUNES23 at checkout, and you can get 10% off your very first purchase at homefieldapparel.com.
Might have to snag a CSU shirt after Smith.
I have my Delaware for Davis.
There you go.
J.R. Davis.
Which is exactly where we're getting to next, because of all the football talk that we've had the pleasure of having, we're in the rare situation on this podcast where we haven't talked about basketball in a while, which is something that would normally lead off our conversations for this podcast at this time of year. And just in Syracuse in general, basketball would still be at the forefront of many people's minds, at least in sports talk radio, on sports shows and local news. That's kind of what you would expect people to be mainly thinking about. And it's Syracuse at this time of year. But again, just because we've had so much great football news, we haven't had the chance to talk about that, at least on this podcast. Let's do that today as Syracuse continues to get its roster correct for the upcoming 24-25 season. And the first one of those recent additions is, as Kevin mentioned, Delaware forward Jair Davis, who is committed to the Orange, a pretty good power forward, second team all conference last season, 17.1 points, 7.5 rebounds. And so you expect him with Malik Brown going to Duke to kind of fit into the power forward role that Brown kind of quote unquote leaves behind.
Yeah, I think so. It's a big body. Obviously, with Donnie Freeman coming in, we talk about 5-star recruits and top recruits, highest rated basketball recruit since Carmelo.
He settling at like I think 5 or 6 now in most people's ratings and in overall class.
Right. Yeah, which is very impressive. And the reports Freeman in those postseason All-Star games at McDonald's All-American, Jordan Brand Classic is that he's shown the ability to play both forward spots, shown a little bit better offensive game from outside. So there's some possibility that Davis allows Freeman to maybe slide some minutes at the 3. Or Davis could be Brown's role of playing some small ball 5, which he did at Delaware. Obviously, you've got Lampkin and McLeod at center, but with William Patterson and Munihima leaving, there are 2 centers now. And so the question would be who the third center might be. So Davis might fill in a little bit on that area as well.
And whether it was just a roster makeup thing or if this is something indicative of what Adrian Autry wants to do, what we saw last season was a willingness and a want to play high-tempo offense and high-tempo basketball. And so if you want to go small ball, that kind of lends yourself more to that style of basketball where you could see a Davis moving to the 5 and then having a Freeman at the 4 and Bell at the 3. That kind of makes a good small ball, high tempo offense system that could potentially, cause a wrench in some people's plans for a good 4 or 5 minute stretch.
Right.
Yeah, I think Autry wants to be able to have an adaptable roster. I think he wants to be able to adjust. And as we saw when McLeod went down and not having a big body, it hurt Syracuse against some teams that had stronger interior players, where the Orange were just overmatched inside. And I think what Autry's trying to do with this flexibility is have a roster where he can not only dictate but also respond to opponents. And so if you've got opponents that want to have a center that shoots threes, it's going to be tough to ask Naheem McLeod or Lampkin to guard on the perimeter, especially in pick and roll situations. And so, if you have the ability to put an experienced player in there who can match up when teams want to do that, which you see more and more in the college game, it gives him some of that flexibility. Takes some of the pressure off Freeman. I think right away expectations are high for a player of his caliber, but he's going to be a freshman. And so there are going to be some situations where you might, need a veteran presence to be there to help stabilize and take some of the pressure off.
Yeah, and right now, as it sits, I'm counting 10 scholarship players.
Yeah.
So we've still got some room to bring in a couple of other needs, which also looking at the roster seems to be someone to keep the ball in their hands.
One of the person who can keep the ball in their hands is one of Syracuse's newest transfer pickups as well, in Hofstra guard transfer, Jaquan Carlos, who is expected to be a point guard who, when he was at Hofstra, was a distribution first point guard and a point guard who didn't make turnovers, and ball security was a key for him, and passing and assists and playmaking was a key for him, which is something I think Syracuse fans have been longing for from a point guard for quite some time, especially since the past couple of point guards at Syracuse have been score first point guards.
Right.
Yeah, that's it. So we're at what, five guards, 3 forwards, and the 2 centers.
Yeah, and what you would probably think from that lineup, just based on like a lot of the projections that we've seen so far in terms of Twitter analysts and things like that of making projected lineups, is that the position where Syracuse looks a little light is small forward, because you really only have Chris Bell in that position. So since Adrian Autry now has that wiggle room to grab another couple of players in the transfer portal, you'd expect him to go after someone who can be a small forward and back up, or split time, or maybe even surpass Chris Bell if necessary. And then there's also a lingering Kadari Richmond also in the portal.
There is a Kadari Richmond in the portal. There's also I have a piece that will run in the next couple of days. Miami Hurricane duo of Wooga Poplar from Philly and Norchad Omir.
Yes, those two. Yes, indeed.
Just stab down in the heart while we're at it.
Yes, indeed. Especially Omir. That was one of the bigger shocks of the past weekend, to see his name pop up in the portal.
Yeah, and I think obviously anytime someone pops in the portal like that, you think, oh, they've already got a good NIL offer somewhere else. But I think that the small forward position, I think the Orange will look for someone on the perimeter, possibly, someone who can provide more shooting. And I wouldn't be surprised if they looked at a younger center, because McLeod and Lampkin will both be done next year. McLeod, I guess there's still some question of whether he could apply for a medical red shirt, but that seems up in the air. And so you'd be looking at no centers for the 25-26 season, and not knowing where they don't have any commits. So maybe Fran Brown, while he's out landing football players, can pull a reverse Mike Hopkins and slide red a couple of 26 recruits. But I think
Colorado.
Yeah.
We get Lampkin and then Savion Washington. Like we cannot get someone transferring from Colorado under 260 pounds.
Yeah.
It's contractually obligated now.
Probably, right? Worked it in.
Yeah. Yep.
Can only take players that weighed more than Nick Williams when he was hired away.
Oh, God. So we went from having 75 threes to Chris Bell.
Yes.
Yeah, and Chance Westry, I think the question mark is that that he's got the size to play.
Yeah.
But not really known for shooting. And so I think that's the issue that you have with him right now, is he hasn't played a lot of basketball in the last 2 years as well. I think there's a lot of upside there. But anytime you have a player that's coming off that long of a layoff, there should be questions. And like we talked about football, I think there's going to be, as people are sliding around and switching and changing these last couple of days, I think you're going to see some people that will put their name in the portal, even if they're not sure they're going to leave, because if their team grabs a player that pushes them out, like they want to at least have some options to fall back on. So yeah, hold on to your seats there the next couple of days.
So do we know if either Carlos or Davis can shoot, or are we back to a roster where it's literally Chris Bell and that's it?
Carlos can shoot free throws. He was like 90%, right?
Yeah, I don't think any of them have 3-point range though.
So we're
but from what we saw, it seems like Freeman is developing that long range, which is good to see. And and from what I can tell, it feels like Chance Westbury can have some of that range as well. But again, like Kevin said, who knows how much court rust he has on him, if at all. And that's just a huge mystery.
And you have Elijah Moore, who
indeed, yes, also
won a 3-point shooting contest at one of the high school all-star games.
Right.
The problem with, I wouldn't say the problem, but he plays the same position as JJ Starling. And so as a two guard, the question then is, where's the fit? But I think, there's some possibilities, but I don't think you can have enough shooting, as we kind of learned this year. Thinking we might, and then not being able to really make teams pay for, trying to keep the guards out of the lane, or not providing an option for guards to kick out to, having more than one shooter that can knock down consistently. So,
well, that's
something to watch.
What I was kind of thinking was, like, if Carlos is coming in and he's a distribution first guy, that's cool if you at least have a couple of perimeter options. But if everybody's sitting in that 15 and in range, what the hell are you doing? Like, he can distribute all he wants, but it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, and that's where you have like that lineup balance question that I talked about with James with at the beginning of the season as well, where that was going to be the deciding factor for Syracuse. Obviously, with injuries, it got a lot harder, but like lineup balance was always a huge question, even when everyone was healthy for Syracuse, because it just couldn't feel like Syracuse could find a consistent identity with no matter what lineup they trotted out on the floor. And so that could also potentially become an issue again if you have a guy like, a lineup. If your starting lineup looks like right now, Carlos, Starling, Bell, Davis, and McLeod. Yeah, Bell was your only 3-point shooting option. Starling will sit on the perimeter, but he's slashing inside. So,
well, and you're not going to sit Freeman.
Exactly. Well, maybe. Who knows?
Yeah, I think that's You would think with his, ranking that he'd be ready to come in and start right away. But, you add an experienced player that could allow you to ease him in if it works out that way.
Yeah, and it also depends on, like, we don't know if Red has the Boeheim hook, or if it's, going to let him play through it. Or
is Freeman going to be Michael Penix Jr. with the Atlantic Falcons?
God, Christian, were you around when Fab Melo played?
I was not, unfortunately.
Or Day One?
I was not. I was around with Day One, obviously, because he played until 2016.
Okay.
I was not around for Fab Melo.
But especially early Day One, where like early Fab and early Day One were almost mirror images of each other, where they started and got approximately 23 and a half seconds and then got yanked for the rest of the first half.
Oh, no, I was very familiar with that for Day One, especially in the 2016 run where we started and 2 seconds later, immediately Tyler Lydon appeared on the field.
Yeah.
It's like a magic trick every single game.
So we did a lot of things for the basketball team in the portal that solved a lot of issues we had, and then new issues arose, is basically how this is all happening.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So.
It'll be interesting to see how Red, kind of finagles around it. Again, like Steve and Kevin said, Red does have 2 more scholarship spots to play with. So
he's 13.
Yeah, he's got 3 actually.
Oh, he's got 3. So
he's got 3. I'd be shocked if he brought in 3 more transfers. I wouldn't be surprised if he went 2 and then, used one for a walk on just to. People worry about roster flexibility, but we saw that. Like, we lost all these sophomores. So, like, there's no sense saving your scholarships to hold for recruits next year because you're probably going to lose 4 or 5 guys anyway. So
that's just the nature of how college athletics is.
Yeah, you can't worry about it. But
well, and yeah, I mean, he doesn't have anyone for next year, right?
No, he does not.
Not yet.
Yeah. Which is weird when the Syracuse
when the football team has 3 people for next year and basketball doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Again, Steve is still trying to process kind of what timeline he's in because of that.
The Bills are good. Syracuse football is good, and the basketball team has question marks. I don't know what my sportsness is doing right now.
Keon Coleman put Wegmans cookies on the map.
He's got that sponsorship deal already.
Yep.
I would have loved to see a live track of Macy's stocks as well after that press conference from Keon Coleman.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I didn't see. What did he drop?
No, he just remarked about his presser jacket was from Macy's, not some like high end retailer or like specially made like jacket. It was just a Macy's jacket.
Just went down to Macy's and grabbed it.
Well, someone tried to make the joke about, oh, you're coming from Florida State, you'll have to adjust to winter. And he reminded them that he'd been at Michigan State and he knew about winter coats.
Yep.
So
we do have those. Cool.
Indeed.
Yeah, and the Yankees don't suck. I don't know what's happening.
The Yankees sometimes suck, but that's only when they decide to hit into 554 double plays in a game.
That seemed like one series. I'll take that as a fluke so far.
Yeah.
There's still plenty of time for that to start.
It's very good to be Christian right now for his Yankees doing well, his Jets having a competent draft. It's incredible. Don't ask about the Nets and the Devils, but
the bar got set pretty low for you with the Jets.
Yeah.
So.
Also, don't ask about Manchester United. Let's not go there.
Yeah.
It's not looking good on that end. What's also not looking good is Syracuse women's lacrosse inability to defeat Boston College.
Oh, that's approaching LeBron versus Jokic levels of one-sidedness. But hey, LeBron turned it around once, and so I think the one positive is that the women, obviously at the top in women's lacrosse, there's not a lot separating these teams. They seem to beat each other.
Yeah.
But it feels like we're heading for a heads-on collision for Northwestern Boston College Part 2 Electric Boogaloo in the national championship once again.
Yeah, and I think what Syracuse needs to figure out is offensively. It's weird to talk about Syracuse lacrosse, men's or women's, and feel like the offense is the problem. But it feels like the offense is the problem in both teams. And I'm not as versed as you, Christian, but watching it, they both seem to suffer from the same fate, which is sometimes their coaches let them play loose, which is great. But then they get in the fourth quarter of games and they do things like take behind the back bad angle shots when you desperately need to get a possession or try and throw a pass into 3 players, and force things and
it's
yeah.
It's weird because both offenses are very good at getting out to leads, and the question then just becomes keeping leads. It's a little bit easier for the women because the women have a bit of a stronger defense than the men's. Because, however, it's still for the women's for both teams. It is it's such a free-flowing offense. You have so many talented players that it feels like they not only they want to show off that talent, but they also is just a trademark of both offenses is that the ball moves really, really quickly. It's such a super high tempo and pace that both teams set at the beginning of the game that it becomes really hard to try and maintain that pace at the end of the game. And that's what we saw, at least again, for me watching the Syracuse and calling the Syracuse Cornell game. That's what we saw at the end of the game where Syracuse just created a lot of unforced turnovers, which, eventually led to their demise. And luckily for Syracuse in the Virginia game, for at least on the men's side, they slowly got their head back together on offense, but albeit it needed to be some fire escape, crazy unicorn goals in order for that comeback to happen. I mean, for the women's side, yes, that can happen because you have some really, really talented offensive players in both Emma's, Olivia Adamson. But It just becomes for women's lacrosse, especially for a caliber of team that Syracuse women's lacrosse has. It's just got to be about ball security.
Yeah.
Like you've got to just value the ball, especially when you have one of the most dominant draw control specialists in the entirety of Division I women's lacrosse. You know you're getting the ball, so you might as well value it and put the pressure on the other team.
And I forget, I don't know if it was Charlotte North calling the game today, but they kept talking about when Syracuse was struggling, about how players just had to go to cage and try and draw the foul.
Yeah,
the BC was sending the doubles and triples and forcing them to throw it backwards away from the goal.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, at that point, just they kept emphasizing, like at some point, especially the way the rules are called in women's lacrosse, like the offensive player, you know, usually gets the benefit of the doubt, and you just got to, you know, turn the corner and go and then make them call it.
Exactly.
I think it's hard, but
it is a little bit hard in women's lacrosse because especially if I was in the 8-meter arc, it's so very, very subjective with the umpires and the referees. But again, like you kind of said, and what the Rock has alluded to, like if you don't give them the opportunity to make those calls in the first place, that's just a missed opportunity. You might as well try and draw shooting spaces, try and draw the contact inside the 8-meter. Kind of like in a similar vein in soccer. Like if you don't go inside the penalty box to try and draw the foul, you know, that's not putting the pressure on the defense to, force them to make a play. So, and in women's lacrosse, that's what you have to do anyway, because really you don't score from 12 meters or beyond 8 meters in women's lacrosse. You have to get in the 8-meter to score just based on the way the rules are, especially with dangerous shots. So you might as well get into the 8-meter arc because that's where you're going to score. And the stick skills and the talent that this women's team has, they should be able to draw a couple more of those and they're so good from free positions as well that they might as well.
And they should still get a home.
They will definitely get a home. They'll definitely get a home. They'll get a top 4 seed. It's just, again, the matter of can you tighten that up before you get to BC or Northwestern again.
Now, will that home be home, or will we be playing at CNS with the dome renovations happening?
It'll probably be CNS.
Yeah, or the soccer stadium, depending on the weather.
That too.
Mac's going to let them play over there?
They've done it multiple times.
Yeah.
So.
I know.
Yeah.
That was combined, I think, the third non-golden goal loss for both teams this year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Stupid and insane, but
here
we are. Also, not to breaking news us, but do we want somebody else back that left? Because Jihad Carter just went back in the portal.
I did see that. I don't. Unfortunately for Jihad, I do not think there's a spot for him on this team, especially with Deuce moving over to safety. Jihad would be a
corner in the spring game.
No, he's playing safety. It was Devin Grant and Jaden Bellamy as the corners.
Yeah.
And
0 out there at the corner slot.
No, he could have been a nickel.
Yeah, I was going to say he might
might-
play like a slot corner type.
Yeah.
Yeah, because King and Barron were basically playing nickels at times.
Yeah.
But it was definitely Devin Grant and Jaden Bellamy as the corners. Which also, side note, was surprising because I expected Marcellus Barnes to be this other starting corner. He was really, really stepping up in spring practice, and he was getting some runtime with the ones. So that was an interesting development.
Good rotation in there. And
Yeah, that's it.
that works.
Indeed. Well, a lot for that women's team to clean up and and things to improve. One, I'm sure Kayla Trainer will have that team firing and ready to go by the time the NCAA tournament rolls around. For the men's side, for men's lacrosse, they've got their ACC tournament happening next week, and their first round matchup in the ACC tournament is the Duke Blue Devils, who almost somehow did not make it into the ACC tournament, which would have been the funniest thing in the world.
And they would have gotten knocked out by UNC, weirdly.
Yeah, and guess what? The differential and guess what the deciding factor was between Duke and UNC? Goal difference.
Wow.
Because UNC won the game, But UNC won the game, but Duke lost it by just enough to not get knocked out.
Jesus, that's insane.
They really need to convince some of these other schools to form a men's team.
Clemson has a pretty good MCLA program, which is like a official, unofficial NCAA club version of men's lacrosse for like a bunch of Division I schools, and even has they even have a Division III level for lacrosse programs that are not officially varsity programs recognized by the school. So like Texas has a program, BYU has a program, Virginia Tech has a program, Clemson has a program. So
I mean, we should make Stanford and Cal. Like, you want to join, you have to start cross programs.
Like, even for Stanford, it would obviously right now travel wouldn't make sense, but like Stanford has a decent women's program.
Yep.
So it would make all the sense in the world. Cal's women's program is not good, but women's program for Stanford is pretty decent.
Yeah.
So like Syracuse desperately, I mean the ACC really desperately needs to get up to 6 teams to get an auto bid. It would just make things for all parties involved so much smoother.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Just knowing, I guess, but also like, does the ACC need an auto bid?
No, though some years they do. Luckily this year they don't, because all the teams that are participating in the ACC tournament will make it into the NCAA tournament. Luckily for the ACC. But in other years, like that has definitely been a factor where Syracuse doesn't make it into the NCAA tournament. Or like in some years, Syracuse was close to being on the bubble and not making it into the NCAA tournament. And a lot of that also was to do with not having a bid.
Yeah, I guess my brain's just thinking from the top end. But yeah, if there's that chance of spiking the tournament, that does change things. Yeah.
Indeed.
I gotcha.
It is weird, though, with Division I men's lacrosse, because Division I men's lacrosse has been growing, but that's mainly because pretty much every single new program that's joined Division I men's lacrosse in the past couple of years have all been Division II programs moving up to Division I. So that's just kind of an interesting factor into that as well. There hasn't been like a newly created Division I Power 5 conference in quite some time.
Probably Michigan or Ohio State, one of those.
Yeah, I believe it was one of those two. So hopefully one of like a program like Clemson, Virginia Tech, or Boston College joins the ACC men's lacrosse. One of those 3 schools is primed for it. But hopefully we'll see that soon. That will do it also for this week's edition of the Disloyal Idiots Podcast. We definitely went portaling. Whose portal was it anyway? It was definitely all of ours, because, boy, the portal just continues to not stop. And again, it finally will come to a slow crawl when the portal closes on May 1st, but that doesn't mean, just because the portal is closed, that doesn't mean people will stop committing from said portal. That is just the deadline for putting your name into the transfer portal. I'm pretty sure Fran Brown and Adrian Auchi will like to collect some of those names who have submitted their names into the portal by that time. And of course, we'll be here as those commits come in. Kevin, I want to thank you so much for joining Steve and I on this week's edition of the Disloyal Idiots program.
My pleasure, guys. Always happy to pop in.
We will beam back Andy Pregler from Spain at some point to join us on this program once again. And so that we can do the same thing we just did with you, Kevin, pick his brain about what the hell has just happened with Syracuse football.
He just happened to be in Spain, 2 of the biggest weeks that we've had around here. So this will be next week should be a good
debrief.
Yes.
Also of note, for anyone who didn't catch it, Syracuse is continuing to be Canadian Canada's college team with that commit yesterday, Antoine Bolloré from Quebec. So,
and also shout outs to and congratulations to Isaiah Johnson for signing an undrafted free agent deal with the Miami Dolphins as well. The only person from Syracuse, at least that we could saw from our end, signing a UDFA deal of any sort with an NFL team. So, Fran Brown looks to definitely change that next year,
Yes.
especially with the graphic that the Syracuse social media accounts put out today. Again, that will do it for us here at the Disloyal Idiots Podcast. Thank you all so much for joining us. If you are watching on your live stream viewer of choice, as always, Sundays at 8 p.m. These may slow down as the off season rolls around, but if Fran Brown has anything to say about that, it probably won't. Sundays at 8 p.m. on Twitch, YouTube, or Twitter. If you're listening on your podcast platform of choice, we always thank you as well for listening on your podcast platform of choice. You can please rate, review, subscribe, leave a comment so that we can trick the algorithm into expanding the Ottoman Empire. And if you're watching on our sister site, newstradition.com, we thank you as always for visiting the site at newstradition.com. You can click on the links below the video to see all of our previous episodes and, of course, read the latest articles and musings we have about the Syracuse athletics program. Thank you all so much for listening and tuning into this week's edition of the Disloyal Idiots podcast. And as always, go Orange.
Go Orange.